dark medieval night, a whisper was spreading across the mountains of Europe. Such a belief, what the church called heresy, and whose followers were quietly spreading throughout the Balkans. These people rejected wealth, power, and royal authority. They used to say that the powers of the world are illusions, and true salvation lies only in the freedom of the soul. They were called followers of Bogomilism. For the church, this was not just a religious disagreement. This was a threat to his power. Then one day the decision was made that innovation must be eliminated. An announcement was made at the Hungarian court. An army was raised under the leadership of the Galician Prince Koloman. This wasn't just a war. It was a crusade, which is not for Jerusalem. Rather, it was launched to eradicate a belief within Europe. Swords rise, the flags were raised, and the Crusader army began to advance towards Bosnia. But another shadow was looming on the horizon of history. Such a power, which was going to shake the whole of Europe. A storm of destruction coming from the east. Mongol. Were the Bogomils really a threat? Or was this war actually a battle of power and politics? And how did a crusade suddenly get lost in the whirlwind of history? This is the story of this mysterious Bosnian crusade, which history has almost been forgotten. This video covers the complete history of Bogomils in Bosnia. So let's get started. The Bosnian Crusade was fought from 1235 to 1241 against unspecified heretics and was essentially a Hungarian conquest of the Bosnian Banate, which was sanctioned as a crusade. Led by the Hungarian prince, Koloman, the Crusaders succeeded in conquering only peripheral parts of the country. They were followed by the Dominicans, who built a cathedral and burned some of the heretics to death. The Crusades came to an abrupt end when Hungary itself was attacked by the Mongols during the Mongol invasion of Europe. The Crusaders were forced to retreat and turn over their attackers, many of whom were killed, including Koloman. The Pope later called for more crusades against Bosnia, but these never took place. The failed crusade created a distrust and hatred of Hungary among the Bosnians that lasted for centuries. Who were the Bogomils? Bogomilism was a medieval Christian religious movement that emerged in the Balkans in the 10th century. Its followers was called Bogomils. This movement was founded on the basis of spiritual reform, simple living, and opposition to ecclesiastical authority. Bogomilism originated around 930 to 950 AD. Bulgaria took place in 1490. When Bulgaria was under Byzantine and local political pressure. The movement was usually initiated by a priest, Bogomil. Although information about his life is limited, according to historical sources, he began preaching against the corruption of the church and worldly power. Bogomil means in Slavic, friend of God. Bogomilism was not simply a religious movement, but a social and political reaction, which was also due to the religious and political conditions of the time, such as it was a reaction to the growing wealth and power of the church, heavy taxes on the common people, the rigors of the feudal system, spiritual corruption, and the excesses of religious ritual. The people wanted a simple, pure, and direct spirituality, and that was the message the Bogomils delivered. The main beliefs of the Bogomils included dualism. The creator of the spiritual world is a good god, while they considered the material world to be demonic. Opposing the church and priests. Rejection of the cross and religious symbols. Living a simple life and avoiding wealth. emphasizing spiritual purity rather than formal rituals. For this reason, they were declared heretics, especially by Eastern Orthodox Church. Bogomilism emerged from Bulgaria, Byzantine Empire, Serbia, Bosnia and Herzegovina. The movement was particularly strong in Bosnia, where it later received semi-official support. The Bogomils were branded as heretics, persecuted, imprisoned, and some burned alive. Over time, the movement weakened due to political changes, ecclesiastical pressure, and Ottoman conquests. First Crusade against the Bogomils, April 1203. The Crusader army that headed to the Balkans in April 1203 was actually Fourth Crusade. The original purpose of the crusade was to reach Egypt and Jerusalem. It is not specifically called the First Crusade against the Bogomils. However, religious and political campaigns against the Bogomils were underway at the same time, and the events of 1203 changed the balance of power in the entire region. Scroll background. Why were the Bogomils targeted? In the 19th century, when Bulgaria emerged from, and later Bosnia and Herzegovina, Bogomilism spread throughout the Balkans. So they rejected church authority because of their beliefs and adopted a simple spiritual life, which the church declared heresy. Therefore, religious pressure and military operations against them continued from time to time. The First Crusade was averted in April 1203, when the Bosnians under Ban Colin pledged to practice Christianity according to the Roman Catholic rite and to acknowledge the spiritual supremacy of the Pope. Colin also acknowledged the secular supremacy of the Hungarian kings over Bosnia. As a result, however, the independence of the Bosnian Church and the Bosnian Banate continued to grow. At the height of the Albigensian Crusade against the French Cathars in the 1220s, a rumor spread that a Cathar antipope, called Nicetas, was residing in Bosnia. It was never clear whether Nicetas existed, but neighboring Hungary took advantage of the rumor to reclaim Bosnia, which was rapidly becoming independent. Bosnians were accused of being sympathizers of Bogomilism, a Christian sect closely related to Catharism and thus also dualistic. In 1221, the concern finally prompted Pope Honorius III to preach a crusade against Bosnia. He repeated it in 1225, but internal problems prevented the Hungarians from answering his call. War against the Bogomils in the 1220s. The 1220s were a crucial period in the religious and political conflict of the Balkans. During this period, Bogomilism's followers were strong, especially in Bosnia, which was strongly opposed by the Catholic Church and the Hungarian monarchy. In Bosnia, local rulers Ben Colin saw relative religious tolerance, allowing the Bogomils to take root. In the 1220s, Bosnia began to be considered a serious religious problem in the eyes of the Western Church, because Bogomilism, the influence of the Roman Catholic Church, was strong. The Roman Catholic Church feared that this movement was not only a religious heresy, but also a threat to the authority of the Pope and to ecclesiastical order in Europe. The local religious structure of Bosnia was often called the Bosnian Church, which was accused of adopting heretical views. Pope in the same background, Pope Honorius III, took the Bosnian problem seriously. The Hungarian rulers were pressured by papal letters and edicts to intervene in Bosnia and stamp out heresy. Since Bosnia was geographically close to Hungarian influence, Hungary was tasked with restoring Catholic authority. At this stage, the religious issue became politically motivated, as the Hungarian monarchy sought to consolidate its control over Bosnia. Honorius III's successor, Pope Gregory IX, himself accused the Catholic Bishop of Bosnia of illiteracy, simony, ignorance of the baptismal formula, and failure to celebrate Mass and the sacraments, as well as harboring heretics. He was deposed in 1233 and replaced by a German Dominican prelate, John of Wildschausen, the first non-Bosnian bishop of Bosnia. But even this did not satisfy Gregory. Thus, with the support of the Pope, Hungary's potential military operations were given a religious justification. Although not as organized and extensive as the Middle Eastern Crusades, they were given a crusade color. The eradication of heresy was declared a sacred duty, and local rulers and soldiers were encouraged to participate in the campaign. Thus began a combined process of political expansion and military pressure in the name of religious reform in the 1220s. As a result, Bosnia was subjected to constant religious surveillance, diplomatic pressure, and intermittent military intervention. Although the Bogomils were not immediately completely eliminated, the declaration made Bosnia a key arena of medieval European religious politics, where faith, power, and territorial interests were intertwined. Active fighting began in 1235. In August 1236, Pope Gregory ordered the Crusaders not to say anything to Matthew Ninislav's relative, Spislav, the Countess of Azura, or his mother, both of whom were good Catholics. However, the Crusaders failed to conquer all of Bosnia. These conquerors now took control of the Catholic Church in Bosnia, which was now led by a new bishop, the Hungarian Pansa. Then in 1241, the Mongol invasion of Europe spared Bosnia. Batu Khan the Mongols, under the command of the Kievan Rus, invaded Hungary. The Hungarian forces were forced to withdraw from Bosnia and face the invaders. Most of their army was wiped out at the Battle of Muhui. Among the dead was the Crusader commander Koloman. The Mongols plundered Dalmatia, Croatia, Zeta, Serbia, and Bulgaria. Their invasion proved disastrous for all of the Balkans except Bosnia. The Crusaders were devastated and unable to return. Bosnia retook the occupied territories and maintained a degree of independence, which was followed by the Hungarian War of Conquest, which was recognized as a crusade. To understand the political situation in Bosnia around 1246, it is important to keep in mind the balance of power in the entire Balkans. At this time, Bosnia was not a fully independent kingdom, but a semi-independent state called a Banate. The local rulers ostensibly acknowledged Hungarian supremacy, but in practice maintained their own internal autonomy. This semi-independence later became a source of tension, as Hungary wanted Bosnia to be fully incorporated into its political and religious sphere. King Béla IV of Hungary was reorganizing his empire after the Mongol invasions, 1241 to 1242. The Mongol invasion had severely damaged Hungary, but Béla IV subsequently pursued a policy of defensive fortifications, military reforms, and direct control of the borderlands. Bosnia was geographically important, as it connected Central Europe to the Adriatic coast and the Balkan hinterland. Influence over it was not only a religious matter, but also a commercial and military interest. At the same time, there was also intense pressure from the Roman Catholic Church. There was a perception in Rome that Bogomilism or similar teachings had spread in Bosnia, which were considered a deviation from the Catholic faith. For the papal court, this was not simply an ideological problem, but a question of church authority. If an independent religious structure had existed in Bosnia, it could have challenged the central power of Rome. This paved the way for political intervention in the name of religious reform. The Bosnian aristocracy and the local church were also not ready to accept external control easily. They wanted to maintain their traditional autonomy and local influence. This resistance further increased tensions. This situation was dangerous for Hungary, because if Bosnia remained weak or unstable, Serbia or other regional powers could establish influence there. At the same time, the Kingdom of Serbia was also strengthening its position in the Balkans, which Hungary feared would lead to Bosnia slipping out of its hands. Thus, the political atmosphere around 1246 was a complex chessboard of power. On the one hand, Hungary wanted to secure and expand its borders. On the other hand, the papal authority wanted to enforce religious uniformity, while Bosnia was trying to preserve its semi-autonomy. Religion was used as a justification, but in the background the real question was one of power, border security, and territorial supremacy. This political tension kept Bosnia a constant arena of external pressure and internal conflict in the decades to come. Nature of the campaign. Military operations against Bosnia around 1246 were not designed to achieve complete and decisive victory, but rather to exert pressure, show strength, and gain political compliance. In this campaign, the Hungarian army reduced direct sieges of major cities to short-lived ones, as Bosnia's mountainous geography and difficult roads were not suitable for large-scale warfare. Instead, it was a priority to gain control of border fortresses, key passes, and trade routes in order to militarily and economically confine Bosnia. The Hungarian army, which had been reorganized after the Mongol invasions under Béla IV, was relatively well fortified and had a cavalry force. The campaign used fast cavalry units, which made surprise raids across the plains and valleys of Bosnia, targeting the estates of local chieftains and forcing them into submission. Small-scale skirmishes and limited battles were more common than direct major battles. A key part of the military strategy was to divide the Bosnian elite. Some local chieftains were allied and given political or financial incentives, while operations were carried out against those who resisted. Some fortresses were captured and loyal Hungarian officers were stationed there to maintain territorial control. In this way, a gradual military pressure was maintained rather than a complete occupation. The campaign also had a religious element on a practical level. Since groups associated with Bogomilism were considered heretical in Bosnia, places of worship and religious centers in areas suspected of anti-Roman activities were targeted. Although evidence of widespread killings is limited, there are reports of some local leaders being arrested or exiled in order to weaken the leadership of the resistance. Geographical conditions made the campaign slow and gradual. It was difficult to transport heavy military equipment through the mountainous terrain of Bosnia, so quick, short, and symbolic attacks were considered more effective. The Hungarian leadership maintained a permanent military presence in the border areas to maintain constant pressure on Bosnia and to prevent any external power, especially the Kingdom of Serbia, from intervening. Thus, the military campaign around 1246 was more of a pressure-based military strategy than a traditional decisive battle. It involved fortification, rapid cavalry attacks, political alliances, religious legitimacy, and border control. The goal was not total destruction, but rather the establishment of obedience, stability, and territorial supremacy, and this strategy kept Bosnia under constant external military surveillance for years to come. Matthew Ninislav seems to have convinced Pope Innocent, who suspended the Crusade in March 1248. After 1248, the campaign against Bosnia did not completely cease, but continued in various forms. By then, the Balkan region was in constant political and religious turmoil, and Bosnia was considered a hotbed of heretical tendencies in the eyes of the Western Church. For this reason, the religious situation there and the politics of the local powers became a major issue for the European powers. There were groups in Bosnia that were considered heretical by the Roman Church, especially those influenced by Bogomilism. This was why both Hungary and the Catholic Church wanted to establish greater control over the region. The operations after 1248 consisted mostly of political pressure, religious reforms, and limited military measures. However, Bosnia's mountainous geography and resistance from the local nobility made it difficult to achieve a complete military victory. At the same time, the Church also continued to strive for religious reform in Bosnia. Catholic bishops and missionaries were sent to Bosnia to bring the religious structure there into line with Rome. The aim of these measures was to bring the local population closer to Catholicism and to weaken heretical ideas. In the process, some local leaders were persuaded to unite with the Church, while others faced political or religious pressure. In the following years, Bosnia became a region where the balance of power was constantly shifting. Hungary wanted to strengthen its border security and regional influence, while local Bosnian rulers sought to maintain their autonomy. At the same time, other powers were also emerging in the Balkans, in which the Kingdom of Serbia was playing a significant role. Bosnia was therefore not only an arena of religious conflict, but also a center of regional politics. Over time, this conflict became a protracted political and religious struggle rather than a full-scale war. Bosnian rulers sometimes negotiated with Hungary and sometimes tried to maintain their independence. Throughout this process, religion was often used in conjunction with political interests. This is why, in the mid-13th century and later, Bosnia remained one of those regions of Europe where religious differences, regional politics, and military pressure were closely intertwined. Later, in the 14th and 15th centuries, a new power emerged that eventually took over the region, and that was the Ottoman Empire. The Ottoman advance into the Balkans actually began in the mid-14th century. They first consolidated their power in Anatolia and then began to move towards Europe. Their presence in the Balkans was strengthened when they captured the Gallipoli region in 1354. After that, they gradually expanded their influence in Bulgaria, Serbia, and other areas. During this time, Bosnia also became part of their political interests, as this region was an important geographical bridge between Central Europe and the Balkans. By the 15th century, Bosnia had emerged as an independent kingdom, but internal political weakness and external pressure were weakening it. Meanwhile, the Ottomans continued to gain military power in the Balkans. The decisive campaign against Bosnia came in 1463 when the Ottoman Sultan Mehmed II invaded Bosnia. Mehmed II was the same ruler who had conquered Constantinople a few years earlier in 1453 and wanted to expand his empire into Europe. The Campaign of 1463. In the 1463 campaign, the Ottoman army quickly captured key Bosnian fortresses and cities. Bosnian King Stephen Tomasevich could not resist the Ottomans for long. He was captured and later killed, ending the independent Bosnian kingdom. After this victory, Bosnia was organized as a province of the Ottoman Empire, and an Ottoman administration was established there. The Ottomans took several steps to maintain control over Bosnia. They divided local lands into Ottoman feudal lords, Timar system, stationed military garrisons and fortresses, and attempted to incorporate the local nobility into their administration. Over time, the influence of Islamic culture and Ottoman rule began to grow in Bosnia. Many local families joined the Ottoman system, gaining political and economic benefits. Thus, the political and religious conflict that began after 1248 finally ended with the Ottoman conquests. After 1463, Bosnia remained under the rule of the Ottoman Empire for almost 4 centuries, during which time the region's religious, cultural, and political identity underwent major changes.